This past week we introduced the research assignment, and the goal now is to have you get started on your research once your issue proposal is approved. Once again, first thing in the morning, I will make sure to read through and give you my comments on your issue proposal, so always check those first before you begin to do any research. Now, as you launch into your research, and once again, if you haven't watched the recording of the live lecture before you do so, please watch it, because it goes through, it kind of walks you through the assignment, through the research process, through the expectations for this assignment. One part of this larger assignment is I want you to do a working bibliography as you do your research. Now, working bibliography, there are all kinds of bibliographies. Your references page, which is once again the other word that we use for an APA documentation for bibliography. It comes at the very end of your paper. It's a page by itself. It's entitled References, and it includes alphabetized the sources that you actually refer to in your paper. But there are other types of bibliographies, and the one that I want you to do is called a working bibliography. And what that means is, as you do your research, I want you to keep track of what you look at and write a brief paragraph, even if you decide not to use the source. And there's several reasons for this. So first of all, this annotated bibliography assignment, and that's the title of it. Notice that it's got the same root word as the word note. Okay, so annotated bibliography means notes that you've made, including a bibliographic reference as you do research. One of the main reasons that I want you to do this is because what I find with most student researchers, and maybe most researchers in general, unless you're very practiced and understand good research methodology, is that they will stop with the first, like, let's just say for our paper, you may use 5 to 8 separate sources. Many students will stop with the first 5 that they find. Okay. Just to get this done, let me finish. That's not good methodology. You should look at a lot more sources than you actually even use in the paper. So one of the reasons that I have students do an annotated bibliography is it forces them to go beyond just the first few items that they find. So let's look at the guidelines, and a copy of these guidelines are in this week 12 through 13 folder. All right, it's a 50-point assignment. It will not be due, by the way, until April the 15th. Spring break begins next week, April 1st, and continues through that following week. So you have a couple. You will have no assignments due until the 15th. Okay. Now I don't necessarily expect you once again to do work over spring break, and quite frankly, I'm not going to do work over spring break, which is next week. So that's the reason you've literally got 3. Well, let's see, more than that. 1, 2. That's roughly 3 to 4 weeks to complete this. So what I'm hoping is to make it manageable. I sometimes recommend students just find 1 to 2 sources a day for a week, and you've knocked it out. But all right, here are the guidelines. You're required to use 5 to 8 or more. More than 8 is fine. Fewer than 5 is not. Sources in the development of your paper, but you should consult a lot more than you use. For this annotated bibliography assignment, you will evaluate 8 to 10 to find the best support that you can for the claim. And remember, claim is just another word for thesis and argumentation that you want to make. Not only do I want you to include the correct APA information in each, so in other words, that complete bibliographic entry, and we'll look at that in a second, but I also want you to annotate, which means include a response to each source to make sure that you understand the content and to help you determine each source's credibility and usefulness. By the way, if you haven't looked at your definition rights yet, please do so. I think I've gotten most of those graded. If not, they'll be finished tomorrow. Please look back over, especially if I had to count off for anything, because you want to make sure to not keep repeating the same mistakes, especially when it comes to documentation. All right, here are the specific requirements. The annotated bibliography should contain a title, so whatever your topic may be, and then a subtitle, and the subtitle should always be annotated bibliography. Okay. It should contain 8 to 10 separate sources that you have read, even though you will not necessarily use all of it in the development of the paper. Then there should be 1 paragraph for each of those 8 to 10 sources. Okay, so include one paragraph for each entry. You need to write those paragraphs in complete sentences. They should be your subjective response, so it's fine to use I, all right? Whether or not you think the source is credible. By the way, if you're using the GNTC databases, they are credible. Okay. If you're using a Google search, that's when you have to explain to me why you think this source, what extra work did you do to find out if this source will work for you? Okay. So you have to explain that and a statement of how and where in your paper you might possibly use it. Okay. Alphabetize just as you would a references page and use the same hanging indentations. More on this in a second. Include the header provided earlier. All right, so that's here in the upper left-hand corner, your name, English 1101, my name, and then the date. And then use standard American English, which means, once again, some of you are still being pretty casual with your language usage. You're using YOU, you're using lots of contractions, sometimes cliches or slang expressions. Please elevate your language, especially for this for all remaining assignments, okay? All right, and so I've got a sample here of a source that I found. Let me see if I can't get that to go any higher. So, all right, so here's the title. Here's the header. Here's the title, annotated bibliography. All right, remember in APA documentation style, you invert the author's names in the bibliographic entry. You don't do it in the text, and you don't need the initial as part of the in-text citations. So Adams, comma, J, period. Then here is the publication information. Remember in the paper itself, if you were actually to use information from this source, you would just use 2007 in the in-text citations. But in the bibliographic entry, you put the complete date in parentheses, period. Then the title, and once again, the title of the article you do not place in quotation marks, and you don't capitalize all the words. Then the title of the journal or magazine or newspaper. And then this is the publication information. This is volume 4, number 2 in parentheses. These are the page numbers. Then you have to have your retrieval information. So there's that. And once again, if you're using a database, all you have to do is put from Galileo database, from Academic Search Complete, from Nexus Uni, whatever. If you find it online, if you use something from a popular search engine, then you have to put the complete web address. Okay. And then here's the paragraph. I think the information in this article is unreliable since I found 3 other sources that disagree with the author's findings. Also, as best as I can tell, Canadian laws differ somewhat from American. So anyway, this is this author, this student writer, thinking through this particular source and determining whether or not he would use it. If so, where he would use it. He decided it wasn't credible. He explained why not. Okay. And just to show you, I included a sample annotated bibliography so that you can see what the finished product should look like. So once again, same header, title, subtitle, and then notice that it's alphabetized, and this is called a hanging indentation. You want every line except for the first one for each entry to stand out. So Baines, and then court convicts. So once again, if you don't have an author, you never begin an entry with a date. So what you would use is actually what the article title, which normally would come right here. That moves to the first part of the entry, and you alphabetize accordingly. Okay. All right, there's the hanging indentation where the first line is indented. Now you use regular indentation on your paragraphs, okay? But here's your hanging indent, once again alphabetized by the author's last name. Now I'm going over this because please realize anytime I give you a guideline sheet that's very specific about how I want things to be structured or what you need to do, that's how I grade it. Did you follow the guidelines? Okay. And so continuing, here's more information and so forth. Okay. So I think there are 8 entries on this particular, annotated bibliography. You've got this sample document in your, weeks 12 through 13 folder. Once again, it is not due until April 15th, and I'll send a reminder on this. But really, for the next few weeks, you are free to do your research. You will have no other lessons from me. Please do not procrastinate and wait till the last minute. You want to end strongly. As I mentioned in the last live lecture, this paper is kind of like your final exam for me. You're showing me everything you've learned throughout the semester about good writing, about academic level writing, about research writing. Okay. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email or call.